we all have these physical, emotional, relational, intellectual, spiritual needs. And so a relationship is, or a healthy life is, where those 12 needs are being met. What happens though is I can't meet all of my 12 needs on my own. There's some needs that I need others to help me meet. 95% I can learn, and I need to learn how to meet them on my own and have a relationship with myself and all of that. But I do need relationships to help meet some of the needs. So I do need connection. I do need comfort, and I do need encouragement, and all of those things I need somebody else for.
We'll make it out and fall in love tonight.
Hey everybody, it's just Craig today on the podcast. If you don't follow us on social, we'll kind of fill you in a little bit on what took place. Last month, Stephanie's dad passed away suddenly, and we had to fly back to Utah. It was a obviously terrible situation. It was a sudden thing that happened and took place, and she had a lot that she had to do. So I came back home to Tennessee, and she's been in Utah for the last couple of weeks helping her mom out with some stuff. So that's been a lot. It's been a lot for us to kind of navigate and go through and process, not just for our relationship, but also just being able to support each other from two different locations. It's been really, really challenging and really hard. So the podcast has kind of fallen to the wayside for just a moment. But we do have a new episode today. It's a clip show, and the reason I wanted to highlight this specific episode, it's with Tim Fletcher. It was a really popular episode that we did earlier in the summer, and Tim is all about complex trauma. He's a specialist when it comes to PTSD and complex trauma, and this episode is all about navigating codependency and narcissism and the dance that those two things play out with each other. It was one of those episodes that when we recorded it with Tim, it was incredibly impactful for us. It literally sounded like our relationship, all the different things that he talked about and shared and discussed. So you might actually see yourself reflected in this episode. We sure did, and we've still continually kind of been processing it ever since we got the opportunity to interview Tim. It's a lot. Codependency is a really, really big issue that I think a lot of people are aware of, maybe on the outskirts of maybe, when they think about their relationship and how it needs to be healthier. Codependency for us was something that we didn't ever really start taking a look at until recently. And by recently, I mean, truthfully, earlier this year. And we actually talk about it in this clip, so you'll hear about that in just a moment. But it was something that we were unaware of for a really long time. And the nice thing is that Tim goes through and he breaks it down and explains how codependency is really created through childhood and through those early relationships that you have with your primary caregivers. And the interesting part of codependency and narcissism blending together and kind of facilitating one another is also really profound. So stick around. This is a great interview that we had with Tim Fletcher. Go follow Tim everywhere. You can find him on socials, just at Tim Fletcher. If you go to his website, it's timfletcher.ca. You'll learn more about him there as well. We're really, really big fans of Tim and all the work that he does. He is an incredible counselor, researcher. He's a pastor. He is the founder and creator of the React system up there in Canada. So go check it out. It's a great episode. And next week, we will be back with brand new episodes of the podcast. So stick around, and we're excited to get back at it, everybody. So enjoy this episode, and we'll talk to you soon. I know that you talk about codependency in relationship to narcissism and like the co-narcissist. And when we started looking at that, it was one of those things that was really uncomfortable, right? We didn't like sitting in that space and kind of addressing it, but it really started to open up our eyes to the things that had been going on. It's almost like there had been a different version of our reality that had been playing out all along, where we had a story of when we met, we had a story of how we fell in love, we had a story of our relationship and our marriage and all these different things that had been going on. And then suddenly it was like, it's almost like a movie where suddenly it's like you go back in time and you see the truth of what was really happening. And so I'm hoping that we can get into that a little bit and do our best to kind of, because I don't want anybody to, like I said, I know it's a triggering topic for some people, right, but I think at the same time, it's important to understand where this stuff really but originates and where it comes from and kind of how it manifests.
Yep. So let me start back with the shame piece. So I'm not good enough. So usually a child will respond in one of two ways. So the one is they kind of just give into the shame messages and see themselves as inferior and kind of live out that script. But others try to compensate for it. I don't want to be inferior. I don't want to feel bad about myself all the time. So they overcompensate. And so they go to, I'm going to be better than everybody. And so that becomes their way of surviving. And so narcissism to me comes out of deep shame. It's a survival strategy to try and feel better about yourself. And so you base it not on your internal sense of who you are, but you now base it on your externals, your money, your possessions, your position, the trophy on your arm, all of those types of things that now determine your value and how important you are. So part of why it's important to start there for me is narcissism has really kind of been pathologized as you're just bad. And to me, it was a way of survival and coping for a child who was receiving severe trauma, which resulted in severe shame that I must be really terrible if I'm getting treated this bad. Now they had to compensate for it. So usually that comes out of, and this is so important to understand, is complex trauma within a home usually has one of the parents who is a narcissist, where they want everything to suit them. They want to be the boss. They want everybody to meet their needs, but they're not concerned in using their power and authority to meet the needs of others. They just want their own way. They want everything to suit them. And so the child is giving up their needs to accommodate a narcissist. Their child is trying to please a narcissist. And so a lot of the adaptations and the trauma come from a narcissist, but the child is learning to respond to a narcissist, but something else is also happening. They're developing a subconscious brain template that says, I'm developing skills to live with a narcissist, and this is now my normal, and this feels actually normal. This is my default. I'm good at this. I can survive here. And so what happens with that is they've got their own shame now because they've been feeling all of the, I'm not good enough. I have to give up my needs. I must be bad, not lovable, etc. So they go into relationships and they have this template of, as soon as they're with a narcissist, I feel attracted to that because it feels normal. It feels right. It feels good. And so without even realizing it, they're actually attracted to the very thing that wounded them. But narcissists typically, when you first get to know them, you don't see their dark side. You see only what they want you to see, which is their act, their mask, their performance. And it's very good. It's quite loving and kind in many ways. The dark side doesn't show up until later. And that's where the problems begin. And so co-narcissism and narcissism are two ends of the shame spectrum. One who's compensated by saying, I got to be better and superior. The other that says, co-narcissist, I am inferior. But what then happens to that is the co-narcissist now is, I need you to love me, to the narcissist. So I will enable you to never grow up, to never deal with your issues. I will take your pain away. I will please you. I will fix you just so that you love me. What's also important to understand with that is when you have deep complex trauma and deep shame, you also have a deep fear of abandonment. And so when a person who has received deep trauma, they feel all alone. They feel like they have been abandoned by the very people that should be connecting to them. And that is a terrible, terrible pain for any child to experience. And so now that their deepest fear is that I will never be abandoned again. So I will do whatever is necessary to get a few crumbs of love, even endure abuse, even endure not getting my needs met, just so I will never be abandoned. The narcissist and the co-narcissist both have a deep fear of abandonment. And so they are on their best behavior at first. They're kind of doing what they can to meet each other's needs, but they're not getting their own needs met. Their shame is preventing them from being authentic. Their shame is preventing them from actually receiving love. And so they're not satisfied. They end up with this emptiness, this dissatisfaction, this anger, this negativity that begins to express itself in the relationship, usually passive aggressive at first, but it starts to come out. But then when it starts to break down, they start to panic. Oh, this relationship's going to fall apart. I'll be abandoned. I can't have that. So let's get back on our best behavior. So the relationship starts to follow a cycle. There's a bit of a blow up. Then they're all afraid they're going to be abandoned. So everybody goes back to the honeymoon stage. Let's be on our best behavior. Let's all put our needs aside and just give, and do what the other person wants. But then the emptiness and frustration starts to build, and the tension and stress is building until there's an explosion again. And it just continues on this cycle. And so when you look at a codependent relationship, you could see it in the honeymoon stage and say, wow, that is one happy couple together. Or you could see it on the tension building stage and you go, oh, there's something seems to be there. I just can't put my finger on it. Or it could be at the explosion stage.
I've heard you say it before, and I think it's a great time to bring this up as we're going through this. When you're seeing yourself reflected, you're listening to this, and it feels like a lot. When you start to connect the dots, you're like, oh, that's me. That's our relationship. You're seeing this. This isn't when we're getting this information, it isn't to blame or shame, but it explains. It helps us give these tools, these insights of what's happening, how it's playing out, and why.
Exactly. And if I can just add a piece to that, Steph, what I would say is this. What comes out of shame is the emotions beyond the belief. So the belief is I'm not good enough. The emotions are I feel less than, but that then leads to I need to beat myself up. I need to put myself down. And if I fail, the way to change my behavior is not to be compassionate to myself and forgive myself. It's to be hard on myself. It's to tear myself down. And so a lot of people, when they begin to get these insights, they go to their go-to, which is, okay, let's start beating myself up. I'm a loser, and judge myself. And it's, no, please don't go there. There's no value in that. That's only going to add to more shame. It's going to feed the shame monster even more. You really need to go to this self-compassion and say, hey, now I'm finally understanding why I do what I do. And that doesn't mean I'm consigned to stay there forever. I can now begin to learn how to change that and to heal. And that brings in some hope for the first time. So yeah, that's such an important point. Thank you.
I wonder, Tim, if, because we try to avoid using definitives like every relationship or every person, or if you're, so I'm saying that this way, where it's like, if you're in a codependent relationship, then it's always going to be that narcissist and co-narcissist dynamic.
Right.
Would you say that, I mean, I don't want to say that that's every codependent relationship, but is it pretty common that those behaviors are going to be playing out in that way? Or are there other contributing factors and other kind of like dances that people will have in codependency that don't necessarily have that dynamic of the narcissist and the co-narcissist?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it, because there's important qualifiers that need to be brought into this discussion, because it's not this black and white narcissist, co-narcissist. So a couple of the qualifiers is that in most relationships, each partner can be a co-narcissist and a narcissist. It depends on the day. It depends on what the triggers are. And so they tend to fluctuate. It's very rarely that you have a relationship where it's the same person is always the narcissist, the same person is always the co-narcissist. It can fluctuate.
Really?
Yes.
Like that alone is like blowing my mind right now to think about it that way, where it's, okay, say more. Sorry. I was like, hold on a minute.
So what can happen with the co-narcissist is they give, but they never receive back. And so they begin to get a huge resentment. And one day they explode. And if you don't smarten up, and if you don't start being considerate of me, then I'm leaving you. And they give and it's not an idle threat, but they give a threat. All of a sudden, the narcissist, they're panicking. I'm going to be abandoned here. I better smarten up. And so they don't truly change, but they go into crisis management. And now I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to meet your needs. The other piece with that is a narcissist, usually in the beginning, acts like a co-narcissist. So a narcissist in the beginning, they groom the other person by making them the center of the universe. So I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to mirror back to you what your interests are. I'm going to run and help you whenever you have a need. I'm going to give you gifts. The narcissist makes the other person the center of the universe until they're pretty sure they got the commitment from the other person, and then they switch. And all of a sudden they go back to being the narcissist, and the other person has to be the co-narcissist. So there's already, in the early days, a switch that happens once the commitment is kind of in place. But then that switch can happen back and forth. Is that making sense?
That makes total sense. And I think about that in relation to our relationship, where, I mean, it's hard, Tim, because truthfully, the things that you talk about and the way, what you've just described, we can relate to like 100%. Where when we first met, I was very much making Stephanie the center of my universe.
Right.
I was doing everything that I could to, I mean, conscious, like, this is the other thing that's kind of wonky for me when we talk about these things is you speak about it really clearly, like I mentioned at the beginning, which I think is really great, right? It's not clouded with any sort of like scientific talk or anything like that. You're just speaking about it really plainly. But it also makes it sound like like it's hard, Tim, because I wasn't doing these things in a conscious manner. I'm not sitting there being like, okay, I'm going to manipulate Stephanie and put her in this role. And then when I finally feel like, haha, I've got her and I've caught her in my trap now, I'm going to flip it around and make it this other thing, right?
So let me speak to that, Craig, because I think it's such an important piece. So two pieces. First of all is, for most people, codependency and shame is totally subconscious. So you're living out behaviors you're not even aware. You think your motives are this when you really don't know that the motivation is a deeper shame motivation. And so that's very important to understand. It's a subconscious thing that we tell ourselves often different messages about what's happening than what the truth really is about what's happening. But the second thing is, a shame-based person who's gone to the inferior, I'm less than, their only way of trying to, so they could meet somebody super healthy, and their only way of knowing how to make connection is, I need to take care of your needs. I need to be there for you. I need to give of myself to help you. So they show up and give the person a coffee. They show up and can I help you with this? So their basic approach to relationships is, I have to give in order to get. And so I have to put myself in a servant role in order to get any attraction. So they're not necessarily looking for a narcissist. They're just looking for a relationship. And it could be with a healthy person, and they try to push them to the narcissist position because that's how they know how to relate. And the other person, depending on how healthy they are, they can fall into that and go, oh, this feels good to get all this attention. And before you know it, the relationship's set up inferior superior, because the codependent needed to set the other person as superior in order to feel they're doing it right. And that happens with so many people without them even realizing that they're doing it. Because to them, they're just being a kind person when they meet the person. Can I get you a coffee? Can I do this for you? Can I help you? Oh, if you have a need, just phone me. I'll be glad to come and help you. And so they set up a relationship early on where they're serving, never asking, and no boundaries, never saying no. And it seems like the right thing to do, and it seems so loving and considerate, but they don't see how they've set up the old style of relationship. Does that help?
It does help. I mean, like I said, it helps to understand it, but it also like sucks to still sit in the space of it. I remember when we first met, she needed new tires on her vehicle and it was winter time. And I snuck her car away and I went and got tires for her and, you know, surprised her with tires. And that to me was like just this act of love because I loved her. And I like, you know, we were in that honeymoon phase of our relationship where everything was going really well. And I just wanted to kind of surprise her with this really nice gift. And then you paint this other side. It's like the thing I was talking about earlier where we have another version. And I'm like, what part of me was trying to solidify the relationship in a sense? It's just, it's those parts of us that, like you said, it's the unconscious, it's the subconscious parts of us that are really in some ways acting, you know, on our behalf. I don't know. Because I think about it too, Tim, where it's like, I can see how this relates to attachment. I can see how it relates to me wanting safety and security and trying to attach to somebody, right? Somebody that I love and somebody that I care about. But where do we find, I guess what I'm looking for is some clarity, and clarity is probably not the right word, right? But at what point do we, I guess what I'm asking is, when it comes to this type of behavior, is it something that, like, how is it? I'm getting caught up in my words here.
So
it seems like
can I take a crack at what I think you're getting at?
Yeah, that would be great.
Are you one of the millions who have completely been swept up by the pickleball craze? The type of paddle you play with is a really important choice that absolutely affects your game. Element 6 pickleball paddles are perfect for the beginner or seasoned pro. Element 6 has created premium pickleball paddles. Don't be like us and just buy the first paddle you come across. Start out with an edge in your game. Start out with a lightweight, stylish, of course you want your paddle to look good, and be USAPA approved, just in case, you know, you want to take it competitive or professional. Element 6 was founded by two brothers, and all of their products are manufactured right here in our own backyard in Tennessee. And with a wide range of options and free shipping and returns, there's nothing to lose. Right now, you can get yours. Go to stephandcraig.co, click on the Element 6 link, and enter Steph and Craig as a promo code to save you 10% on your order. And as a bonus, Element 6 is also going to send you a free gift with every order. Get yours today and we'll see you on the courts. Looking for the perfect gift for somebody you love? Try looking beyond material things and get them the most unique gift possible. An unforgettable custom song from Songfinch. Songfinch lets you create an original studio quality song inspired by your own life and the people that you love. It's completely unique, personal, and it lasts forever. Songfinch walks you through a simple 4-step process to create your original song. Just tell them who the song is for, provide them some personal details, and let them know the type of song you want. Then pick your favorite Songfinch artist or get matched with one, and they'll write it, record it, and produce your custom song in just 4 to 7 days. Go to stephandcraig.co, click on the Songfinch link, and enter promo code stephandcraig for $20 off your custom song.
What I emphasize to people all the time is that true love and codependency actually look the same on the surface.
Okay.
Initially, because you're giving. Both are giving, both are making sacrifices, both are concerned about the other person, both are wanting to establish connection with the other person. So love and codependency on the surface initially look the same. And that's why people get confused. Am I codependent? Is this love? So the difference is two things. Number one, the motivation. So codependency, I'm giving so that you'll like me. I'm giving so that you will love me back and meet my needs. Love has an unconditional. I'm giving because you have a need and I want to meet it. If you give nothing back, that's fine. So there's a different motivation. But the second part to that where it begins to change is codependency over time. You begin to see it because the relationship is always out of balance. My needs always matter less than yours. Whereas with true love, your needs matter just as much as mine. It's always going to end up balanced. So I ask you how you're feeling this morning because I care. not because I now have to adjust my day and my moods to make sure you're happy, but that's a loving thing to do. And if you're having a bad day, I go, is there any way I can help? I don't then change my day and just run around trying to take care of you, because you got to fix that up yourself. That's your responsibility, but I can help some of it. So you begin to realize that on the surface, love and codependency look very much alike, but once you get deeper, you see different motivation. You see that the relationship is always out of balance as your needs versus their needs. And you begin to go, okay, that's not true. Codependency isn't healthy love. It's distorted love. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also wanted to swing back around too, because I forgot that I had another question for you. When we talk about narcissists, especially in society today and online and everything like that, it's almost like there's this big blanket label that everybody wants to throw on it to a narcissist, and then they cast them out there over, and it's like, don't touch them, stay away from them, they're evil people, they're the problem, don't ever victim blame somebody that's with a narcissist. And the way that you're describing the dance back and forth, where we'll each take turns kind of in that spectrum of going from co-narcissist to narcissist, is the way that you're speaking about it, are you speaking about it from that, like, this person has been, and I know it's so rare for somebody to get actually diagnosed as a narcissist through like the DSM and the whole 9 yards and everything like that? Or are you speaking about it, like, I guess, how are you speaking about it? Is it that super clear?
Yeah. So again, important qualifying point. So to me, there's two definitions that people really need to understand around narcissism. So there's the DSM, narcissistic personality disorder, and that's the person that's at the extreme end of the spectrum, and they're just there all the time. What I'm talking about is that, and so you end up with relationships like that are very codependent. But what I'm talking about is the majority of the times, it's narcissistic tendencies. And that's very different from a pure narcissist. So everybody coming out of complex trauma has narcissistic tendencies, because what did I have to do to survive? I had to put my needs ahead of yours. And so when my limbic brain is triggered by fear or danger, so the emotional survival part of my brain is triggered, I go into fight, flight, freeze, and it's all about me. It's all about surviving. And so when I'm in my limbic brain, act very narcissistic. And so to me, when you look at borderline personality disorder, basically it's very similar. It's a shame-based person who can act very loving and be very loving 95% of the time. But when their fear of abandonment or their shame gets triggered, they become a narcissist. All of a sudden, they're a different person. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? And so that to me is kind of the important distinction, is everybody coming out of complex trauma has narcissistic tendencies, but they don't normally show up unless something has triggered fear or shame or stress in your brain that sends you into that survival response. And then the narcissistic tendencies come up. So that's where when a person's in fear or anger or stress, all of a sudden they expect more of everybody else. You got to be perfect. You got to do this for me. What I want, don't argue with me, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, whoa, this is a narcissist just showed up here. Whereas that's the tendencies when their limbic brain is triggered.
Could you explain what borderline personality is for people that don't understand or haven't heard that term before?
Yeah, so borderline personality is another DSM term, and it's basically a person who, again, can be very normal in life, very calm, very cool, very rational, very reasonable, but then something triggers them and they become irrational. They become full of anger. They lash out. You can't reason with them, and they can do a lot of damage. And then afterwards, they're just very depressed. So it's a real roller coaster of they go to extreme, lashing out high, anger, irrational, to very depressed, but then most of the time calm. And so again, it was like codependency that they first kind of listed all the characteristics of this without really understanding, well, what's this about? And what they found is a person with deep shame and fear of abandonment is, as soon as you're about to expose my shame, or you're about to abandon me, or I think you might abandon me. So that's anytime there's stress, anytime you make me feel stupid, anytime I don't feel that you're present or that you're emotionally not available to me, all of a sudden I'm triggered and I change and I lash out at you, and then we can't resolve it in conflict because I can't be reasoned with. I can only see it my way at that moment. And I'm right, you're wrong. I'm the victim, you're the bad guy, is what begins to happen. And so that is very common within codependency, is to have kind of mild to severe borderline type characteristics when people get triggered.
I like that you're framing this through kind of that lens of like, these are coping mechanisms that stem from that fight or flight response, where, because I know that that's helped me a lot to look at my childhood, to look at what life was really like. I think a lot of times, I know that we used to think this way. We talk to a lot of people where you have the common, understanding of like, yeah, my life wasn't that bad. I had a good childhood. Everything was okay for the most part. Maybe mom and dad, like my parents got divorced when I was 14, but the story that I had around that for a really long time was like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. It was actually better once they got divorced. But the more that I unpacked and really started to understand my childhood, it became really, really clear that it was complex. It was very much traumatic from the get-go. And so, oh my goodness, babe, I had a question in there. What was it? Tell me what the question was, baby. When it comes to, what do you find people, because like, how do we help people understand that? We'll post stuff online all the time, Tim, where people will be like, oh, here we go again. It's always about childhood. It's always about blaming your mom or your dad. It's always about this. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. Like, that's such a big component to the makeup of who we are, is that first, 7 or 8 years of life. And what are some things to help people see that maybe are resistant to kind of looking at it that way?
Well, if I can start with this, a lot of people, when they throw that argument out, oh, here we go again, it's always about childhood. Basically, what they've been exposed to is somebody that's always blaming somebody else for their problems. And they're eternally in victim status and refusing to change and always just blaming somebody. And they see through that and they go, that's not right. What we're doing is helping people understand how childhood shaped all of my coping, all of my thinking, my emotional world. And I need to understand that so I can change it. And the reality is that all of the coping skills that I learned as a child basically become programs in my subconscious brain. And they just operate on autopilot. Like I don't even have to think about it. They're just there, they're going, and different things trigger different programs. And then I just go into doing certain things without even understanding it. We can't change a subconscious program unless we bring it to the conscious mind and become aware of it and then consciously change it. And so the whole thing with all of this is, we're not talking about this to blame people. We're talking about this so we can change the programs. It's all up to leading to my responsibility now. I wasn't responsible for what happened to me or how I had to survive, but I'm responsible for what I do with it now so that I can get healthy. And so this isn't about blaming. This isn't about kind of abdicating personal responsibility today. It's all about personal responsibility today.
When I think about, so like we bring the subconscious to the conscious mind, right? I have awareness of, like, let's say I have awareness of these narcissistic tendencies that I have. And like, it's hard to sit in sometimes, and it's hard to own those experiences and those behaviors. But I'm also doing everything that I can for the most part to shift and change those behaviors. What's the process look like typically where somebody has, because that's the other thing too, is it's one of the fears that we have when we talk about some of these things is that it's never wanting to, like, it would be really easy to describe our relationship from this lens of Craig's the narcissist and Stephanie's the victim, where she was, had to put up with all the shit that I had, because truthfully, we had a lot of struggle in the beginning of our relationship for the first probably 5, 6, 7 years. And the hard part it's like the dance back and forth, I think, is the missing component, where Stephanie also played a role in the dynamic. She also had different things that she did. Do you know what I mean? But it's really difficult to talk through that when we have this label or this dynamic that is set up in culture where we don't want to, it's like bypassing everybody's responsibility for what's going on in the relationship, rather than just making it one person's fault, right? It's just that guy's fault, or it's her fault, or whatever the case may be. Or so what are some things that people can do to kind of help, I guess, take responsibility or ownership of that?
Yep. Such an important question. So the first thing to me is what happens in complex trauma when a child has constant pain and being hurt and needs not being met that they can't resolve. They're trying to resolve, but they can't fix the problem, is they're living with constant pain. And nobody wants to live with constant pain. So they either disconnect from their emotions and shove their emotions down and I'm not going to feel anymore, or they deny and they create a new story for their life that sounds happier. But the key thing is they're not looking at it accurately. They're minimizing, they're denying, they're rationalizing, but nobody's being accurate. Somebody's blaming, but nobody's owning. And so to begin with, you can't heal something unless you properly, accurately diagnose it. And so that's painful to do that, but that has to be the starting point. You got to validate the truth and get rid of the lies. The second piece to me, which is so important, is when I talk to couples with codependency issues, how I describe it to them is this. The guy comes into the relationship, so let's say it's a heterosexual. The guy comes in with his baggage. The woman comes in with her baggage. Then they live together in codependency and create a third set of baggage. What most do when they go into counseling is they want to fix the third set of baggage. But nobody wants to fix their own personal baggage.
Right.
So give me tools so we don't keep hurting each other. Well, I can give you lots of tools, but if you don't deal with your own personal baggage, you're going to keep hurting each other. There's no way to properly deal with the third set of baggage if you don't deal individually with your own personal baggage. The problem with that is, for most people, what you did with complex trauma as a child is you were attuned to the other person. Part of being attuned to the other person's needs and all of that is that now their emotions have more power over you than your own brain to manage your emotions. So if they're upset, you're upset. So you're reflecting, you're mirroring their emotional world. It's like you're regulated by them. So if they're calm, you're calm. But if they're dysregulated, you're dysregulated, because that's how tight the attunement is. So what happens when people start to say, okay, let's work on my own baggage, but they're living together, they're attuned to each other. Well, what's happening? The other person's having a bad day. Well, that's triggering me now. And what happens? I go back to old tools and create more of the third baggage. And so for many people, they can't work on themselves properly unless they somehow get some distance from the other person's stuff, because it just triggers them too much. And they're not strong enough to resist the trigger, to regulate themselves. And so that's the real tricky part for people, is how do you heal yourself when you're in a relationship? Do you need to take a break for a little while? Do you need to set some boundaries that enables you to not deal with certain things, talk about certain things, just work on your own stuff? Like, you have to figure out a way. And that's where most people really struggle. And it's a very practical consideration that I don't want to minimize, but it is so important to sort that out, because if you don't start working on your own stuff and get healthier, you're never going to be able to have a healthier relationship. So with that, then they have to start with healing that shame. They have to start with really beginning to understand not just kind of how their childhood affected them and what they believed about themselves, but all of their ways of coping with that. So self-awareness becomes a huge part of that. But then they have to begin to go, okay, now I understand what unhealthy looks like, but I don't have a clue what healthy looks like. So I have to begin to learn what healthy looks like. And I can't do that if I've never had role models for that. I need some healthier role models now. I need to be in a community that's kind of like a surrogate healthy family, where I'm beginning to learn how to relate. I'm beginning to learn how to deal with problems other than the old tools. So there's a whole new set of hundreds and hundreds of tools that have to be gradually learned. And I think that's the key thing for people, is you don't heal yourself and heal relationships by taking a 4-week course or a 12-week course. This is a very long process, and you got to be super patient, and you're going to need a lot of help.
Chances are you've heard us talk about merino wool because we love it, and you're going to hear us talk about it again. We decided it was really important to us to start bringing in and wearing natural fibers that were good for our health. Woolly Clothing offers 100% merino wool, natural fabric, which is a healthier choice compared to the other synthetics that are often made with plastics. I've been wearing their underwear, their athletic tees, their shirts, and I stole Craig's pants because those are my favorite things to sleep in. Don't worry, he went and got himself his own pair. They're durable, they have tons of versatile styles, and it also really helps when you're trying to wick away all that moisture that they're also odor resistant. They're easy to take care of and also eco-friendly. So head over to stephandcraig.co right now, click on the Woolly link and enter the promo code StephandCraig and get 15% off of your order. If you're ready for natural fibers that feel good on your skin, help regulate your temperature, keep you dry, don't stink, and on top of all of that, look really good. Go pick yourself up some clothes from Woolly now.
Hey everybody, you know how we're always talking about healing together on the podcast? Well, today's episode is brought to you by a new company that's going to help you do exactly that. They're called OurRitual. Whether you're looking to grow individually or as a couple, OurRitual offers up personalized pathways designed by their research experts and therapists, all with the focus to help you unlock a deeper connection with yourself as well as your partner. You get full access to not just the therapist, but video exercises and other tools that are going to help you on your path. All of that for far less than regular therapy. So if you're looking for a flexible and affordable way to level up your relationship, check out OurRitual. Their website is OurRitual.com. OurRitual.com. Head over to OurRitual.com right now and take their quiz. This is going to help you personalize the experience so that you get the care and help that you need the most. OurRitual offers an alternative to traditional therapy and makes it more affordable, more accessible, and a much more engaging process through their user-friendly platform. Right now, listeners of the podcast can save 20% on their first month. Simply use the code StephandCraig20 at checkout. Again, that's StephandCraig20 and save 20%. Their website, one more time, is OurRitual.com. You and your relationship are worth it.
How long have you been using those same nonstick pans that are all scratched up and scraped, not cooking well, and putting off those flecks of that non-scratch surface into your food? It's terrible for you. Do you still have those? We started getting serious about not only the food that we were putting in our bodies, but what we were cooking that food on. So we switched to American-made stainless steel cookware by Heritage Still. Heritage Still is a family-owned business located right here in Tennessee. They have been building great stainless steel clad cookware for over 40 years. They're versatile for all cooktops. They're oven safe, easy to clean, and they have a lifetime warranty. We switched out all our pans, and I am so glad we did. I love cooking with our Heritage Still pans, and I love the fact that when I'm cooking for my kids, my family, I have the peace of mind to know that it's safe for them to eat the food that I'm making. Head over to stephandcraig.co and click on the Heritage Still link, and make sure you enter promo code StephandCraig to save 10% on your order. Start cooking healthier for you and your family today.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I know that in the beginning, because we went through some couples therapy together, and then it was really apparent, I think, that it's exactly what you kind of described, where we had a ton of baggage from just our relationship, and we were trying to address it. We were trying to kind of go at it. And it was really apparent from early on. And we lucked out and we had some really good therapists, and they helped us both together, kind of like in conjunction with one another. But then also we were doing a lot of individual therapy, and it became apparent that we had, we might have had like 3, 4, 5, 6 big suitcases and some backpacks and things like that from our relationship, but we had like storage units of stuff that we had to get into from our past. And it really became almost like setting down the stuff that came from our relationship, from the baggage of our relationship, and really just going towards our own individual stuff. And it was hard. Exactly. It was one of those things that it felt like we were setting down our relationship. It felt like we were ending our relationship. It felt like we were breaking up. It continually was just like simultaneously kind of navigating those own little individual healing journeys together. But at the same time, it was like, I can't show up for you right now because exactly. I literally just don't have the capacity to. I'm so burned out from what I'm going through. I don't have the ability to. I want to go circle back a little bit, Tim, and talk about how addiction plays a role, not just in contributing to all of these things, but one of the things you talked earlier about the pattern and the cycle. That was one thing that we had a lot of awareness of after a few years of getting into stuff was, oh my gosh, we will very much go through the honeymoon phase. Will repeat that, everything's wonderful and amazing and we're having like the greatest sex ever. And then suddenly something will happen and we'll fight and we'll argue. And the next thing you know, it's like, fuck all this. And we're throwing out, and then we have to repair that with sex. And then we just repeat the process over and over and over again. And so I think that what we came to understand, or at least recognize in our own relationship, was there was parts of us too that, because we definitely have addiction, right? Substance and all sorts of different things as well, but we were addicted to that pattern and we were addicted to that cycle. And so if you could speak some more about how addiction kind of plays a role in regards to all of these dynamics.
Yep. So let me go right back to kind of how our brain works when there's danger. So the initial thing is the brain secretes cortisol, which gets adrenaline going, and that gives you the energy to fight or flight. And it's designed to be a short-term fix where you get out of the danger and then the cortisol stops and you relax and you go back to your normal balance in your central nervous system. The problem is complex trauma for a child is they get cortisol and they get really angry and afraid and they want to fight or flight, but they're too little to run away and they're too little to fight. So the brain is going, well, that option didn't work. So now what do I do? So they go to the third option, which is freeze. And that's where the brain now does a different chemical. The brain releases actual natural opioids in the brain. And so fight or flight cortisol basically is I'm going to escape into my outside world. I'm going to go external solution. But if that's not working, what opioids basically do is I'm going to retreat into an internal world that I create that's safe for myself. That's dissociation, basically. But to take it further, cortisol, it puts blood into the extremities and the muscles in the extremities so you can run faster, etc. Puts extra sugar into the blood. Opioids, they bring all the blood from the extremities right around the heart. And basically it is saying, let's get prepared to get hurt and cut so that we don't bleed as much and so we don't feel pain. So opioids deaden the pain and they prepare you to get cut. And so what happens then for people is, depending on kind of the extremity of the trauma, some today still go to the fight flight, but most with complex trauma have gone to the dissociation. They've gone to the opioid version. But somewhere right in the middle crossover, some don't go to the extreme opioids. They go to, I just need a distraction. Let's keep busy. Let's go. So that's their way of dissociation with cortisol. go, distraction. And so that's where you can get into the process addictions. So let's gamble. Let's do risky behaviors. Let's do kind of extreme kind of sexual behaviors, acting out. Let's eat food. Let's exercise, go. But I just have to stay busy all the time. Let's become a workaholic because our society validates that. So that's that. But then you go
That's
to
totally me.
okay.
Yeah.
So then and those people then get attracted to the stimulant drugs, so crack and meth, because that keeps the energy and the power and the good feelings going. But for many, they go to the opioid end of the drug thing, and so that's shut down. Let's isolate. Let's become invisible. Let's go into a fantasy world. Let's split off parts of myself so that I don't feel them or even know they're there. So all of that begins to happen. I can't stay present in the present because it's too painful. So let's go somewhere else that's not painful, is what is there. Then when they find drugs, they go like opioid drugs. I just found the perfect solution. Now I can go to this place. So to me, what's important to understand about the chemical drugs is, so we got kind of 4 good feel chemicals that happen in the brain. So we got dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. So dopamine is the pleasure. Serotonin is I feel close and connected to people socially. Oxytocin is I feel in love. And endorphins is kind of the exercise, pleasure, thrill of that. All of those were designed to be released when a child connects with a safe person at an intimate level. That releases oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. All of those are designed for connection. What happens if a child can't connect in complex trauma? They don't get any of those chemicals. Rather, they get cortisol or opioids. But cortisol and opioids create many of the feelings of oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine. So if you look at drugs, they're dopamine, that's your crack and meth. They've got they've got serotonin, that's your MDMA stuff. All of those things are part of that. And so they release the chemicals that were designed to be released by connection. Problem is they don't last. They're not real, but yet they feel finally so good. And that's why so many people, the first time they actually use, they feel like they're wrapped in a warm blanket. They even have an orgasm that just feels so good. All of those chemicals are finally in the brain. The problem is the more you use the drugs, the more the brain tolerates that. And so you get less and less delivered until you're not getting any of the chemicals anymore. You're just using the drugs so you don't go to even worse negative emotions. You're trying to cope, you're trying to get through a day, but you've given up getting any of the 4 good chemicals anymore. Another piece around that is cutting releases natural opioids. So that's why when people cut, it actually feels good because it releases opioids in the body and it takes the pain away, the emotional pain away. And so that becomes an addiction. So all of those addiction things are actually solutions to not having any positive chemicals in my brain and not connecting because it makes me feel it. So it can be a chemical or a process that gives that release. But again, your needs aren't being met still. And so there's still going to be a deep emptiness afterwards. There's still going to be a deep pain afterwards, which means I got to use more. I got to keep doing it more often. And then it delivers less and less.
It almost seems like damned if you do and damned if you don't. Yeah. Because I'm sitting here thinking about neither one of us have ever had, an intense addiction to illegal drugs or anything like that. But we both have had our fair share. I mean, we both smoked for years and years and years. We both have used alcohol off and on. I guess I should. That's the other big thing I've been working on, Tim, is like not referring to us or we when I speak. That's like my major.
My story is a little different,
right? But I stopped doing a lot of these. We stopped smoking. I stopped smoking years ago, but I find that trying to get off of those other, trying to get off adrenaline, trying to get off of those other chemicals that I can almost feel at times get activated in my body. It's a lot of work. Like it seems almost impossible at times to try to get off of something that my body is naturally producing.
Yeah. So if I can speak to that, kind of two important things. A lot of people, when they think of addiction, they just think in terms of chemicals. So alcohol, drugs, and they go, that started at age 13, 17, whatever. And that's where they go, that's my addiction problems began. But go back, because all people started with process addictions. So a child, let's say, so we got physical needs, emotional needs, intellectual needs, relational needs, spiritual needs, that if one of those isn't met, we feel an emptiness. We feel something's missing, or we feel kind of a thirst in that area. And so we try to get it resolved. We eat food, we drink water, etc. And we can resolve it, and that thirst goes away because the need's been met. But in complex trauma, the child's not being accepted, the child's not being listened to, the child's not being valued, the child's not being validated, the child's not being comforted. So all kinds of emotional needs aren't being met. Nobody's attaching to them. They can't be authentic. And so they've got all of this emptiness inside and pain inside and a thirst inside that they try to resolve, but they can't. But then they go to grandma's, and grandma gives them chocolate ice cream. And that releases chemicals in the brain that feels like those needs have finally been met. And so the brain gets wires crossed. So if I'm feeling sad, the brain doesn't go, I need to be comforted by a safe person. The brain goes, I need chocolate ice cream. And so what happens for people with drug and alcohol addictions is they give up the drug and alcohol, and all of a sudden they find out they're putting on weight because they've gone back to an earlier addiction. They've gone back to eating as their first form of comfort, or they go back to, so what a child does is finds ways to self-soothe. And so we need parents, when we have a need and we're dysregulated because of that need, we have a thirst to meet that need. We need a parent who's regulated to come in and meet the need and to soothe us. And that means they got to connect with us and be safe. But if I don't have that, then I don't get soothed. I don't get regulated. My need doesn't get met. I stay dysregulated, and I don't like that. So I have to find ways to self-soothe. And so a child begins to rock. A child they find masturbation and they begin to masturbate. They find food, they begin to eat. They find exercise and playing sports, and that seems to help. So they find all kinds of different self-soothing techniques, which most of them are all good things, but actually now they're misusing them beyond their original purpose. But it settles them down for a little bit, but it actually makes things worse in the end. It's settling their limbic brain down, but there's going to be consequences down the road that they don't even see at that point. And so what's really happening for people is go back to look at their earliest self-soothing things, because that then becomes your default in your brain as to where it's going to want to go to the minute I'm feeling stressed, the minute I'm feeling upset. I want to go back to what soothed me. So if I haven't learned new healthy tools to soothe in healthy ways, I will go back to the earliest tools that I developed for self-soothing.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I know that. See, I caught it that time. I was going to say, I know but one of my earliest coping mechanisms is food. It's still we came home last night and we had been having some difficult conversations, and I was overwhelmed by the time we got home. And it was like the only thing I could think about was getting the little ice cream bar out of the fridge. And it was even like 9:00 at night. And I'm like, there's a conscious part of my brain that's like, seriously, dude, like you're going to eat the ice cream right now? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to eat the ice cream right now. And so I know that that's a really early one for me. What were you going to say, babe? Were you going to say something?
I was sitting here, like I caught myself, I'm rocking. As you say, some of us rock. And I was like, okay, hold on. There is like so much. There's so many things that I want to try to bring up in this space, but my brain will just jumble them all up into like a cyclone of forgetfulness. But it's really hitting the dissociation, the freeze being like an opioid, and that's scary. I go to the freeze a lot, but I hate it. Like I get stuck there and I feel trapped. I feel like that's when everything bad is going to happen. And so as soon as I can start that cortisol, as soon as I can start, whether it's eating, whether it's micromanaging or obsessing about reorganizing the dishes or something, as soon as I can get out of that, I call it my momentum. As
Exactly.
soon as I can get active, I'm like, oh, I'm okay. As soon as I don't have to think, feel, I can just move, then I'm safe. I like to be awake and on and going, but I can't
Exactly.
sustain that. And then I crash and feel vulnerable and terrified. It's this
Exactly.
cycle.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if I can add one more piece, and it ties in with codependency. So what happens to a child who's had to freeze because they can't fight or flight, but the people that mom and dad who aren't meeting their needs, who are hurting them, neglecting or abusing them, they still need them to meet their needs. So they go to the fourth F, which is fawning. So I will be what you want me to be. I will give up all my rights and all my needs and please you constantly. I'll never say no. I'll become a people pleaser just so that you will let me survive. And so that sets a person up for codependency. So many people who end up in codependency are fawners. That's how they've had to survive as a child. And so that's now their go-to for surviving. Whereas some, like you talked about, Steph, would be, okay, I'm feeling myself freezing. I have to get active, so I need a shot of cortisol. And so you go to extreme activity. So what for many people with fawning is opioids are happening, but you try to get a bit of cortisol happening so that you can become attuned again to somebody else. So you can get into action again. And that helps you with your own anxiety. That helps you with your own internal feelings. Because I feel in control again. I feel I can handle things again. And so again, it's trying to adapt to handle the extreme freeze feeling.
I see that completely. I see too that if I feel like I am doing enough, it's, I think, going back to like I'm loved. Like if I
Exactly.
can be either doing what you want or doing enough activity, then I've earned value, I've earned worth, and I'm safe now because you're not going to leave, whether it's being good enough myself or being what you need. And it's just that, like, I can't believe we're still in this cycle after all these years of work. I'm like, how does this still coming up? And here it
So
is.
if I can add one more piece that I think is important. So when I'm helping people with shame, codependency stuff, they need to understand their childhood, number one. But secondly, they need to understand family dynamics. And thirdly, culture. And so there's two sets of a set of family dynamics and a cultural element that actually support codependency. And it's important to understand that. So for a lot of families and cultures that are either shame based or certain types of religion, basically codependency was seen as love and humility was seen as shame. So if you stood up for yourself, you're being proud. If you validated yourself, you're being proud. You can't have a big head. So we got to keep putting you down so that you stay humble. So shame became equated with humility. And if you give all your needs away and sacrifice, wow, you're the most loving person in the world. And so cultures, shame-based cultures and certain religions actually teach codependency, but call it love, teach humility, or teach shame, but call it humility. And so what that does is it trains a little child's conscience that now if I stand up for myself, I'm being selfish. I am being proud. If I am not giving, I'm lazy. I'm not being loving. So now you have a ton of false guilt on top of everything else because you were trained with the wrong definition of love and the wrong definition of humility. And so part of the healing journey for people is being able to not just deconstruct their childhood, but to deconstruct their family belief systems and their cultural belief systems to begin to identify how their conscience was mistrained so that now they feel false guilt when they shouldn't feel guilt at all. Does that make sense?
I think it makes total sense. And again, it almost feels like we're screwed, Tim, because I feel like that's what, the Western society culture, I feel like we've talked about this a lot too, where it's like we have these early programs because we looked at things through this lens of like Disney movies, where my favorite Disney movie was Beauty and the Beast. And the Beast is, but seeing the dynamic of love play out in relationships on film and on TV, they're really, really toxic, terrible relationships that we're seeing portrayed. And yet it's love, and yet it's ideal, and yet it's the thing that we're all using to, and so it's like, how do we unpack it? Literally, it just feels like there's too much to process. We're bringing awareness to too many things to try to fix and change. And now I just want ice cream. And so,
yeah. And that's where I say to people, that's why we started our online lift program. And so it's 75 modules, which you can do it every day for 15 weeks, or you can do it twice a week or 3 times a week, and it goes longer. But anyways, it's realizing there's so much to unpack that you have to go through a systematic, careful process in doing that. To try to just do it on your own, it gets too overwhelming, or you miss kind of the right sequence of unpacking it, and you get the cart before the horse, and then you get all confused because this isn't working. And so it's really realizing we need help to unpack this properly. And we're not just unpacking it, but we have to learn what healthy is in the process, and tools to how to get healthy as part of that process as well. And it's got to be a gradual journey that somebody kind of walks with me on if I'm going to do it well. And so what I see with a lot of people is they can get a lot of help by watching my videos or reading books, or etc. But typically they grow to a certain point and then they stop. And it's like they can't seem to get beyond that point. And it's what I've seen is because they need somebody with more experience to come in and point out what they can't see yet. And that's just the reality, that we still have blind spots in our own healing journey, and we need help from compassionate people with wisdom and insight. So
what are some things that you find people get stuck on? Like some common things that people, maybe are on the path and they've been doing some work, and maybe they, have a couple of years of sobriety under their belts, but what are some common things that people get stuck up on, get held up on?
I would say, to me, initially in the beginning of recovery, a lot of your recovery is through learning and growing self-awareness. So it's information driven, and it's overwhelming in a sense, but it's also exciting in a sense. Look what I'm learning. I'm putting words finally to stuff. I'm making sense out of stuff. I'm seeing what the tool should be. I'm changing, and a lot of good growth can come out of that. But then you reach a point where you still got to engage in life, and you still got to have relationships. And then what begins to happen is most of the new growth is not initiated by learning material. It's learning by being triggered. And that's not a fun part of growth, because it always starts with pain. It always starts with, oh, I went back to old tools. I'm regressing. I can't do this right. Have I learned anything? But if you don't beat yourself up, if you go to curiosity and self-compassion, you can go, okay, what's going on here? And it's realizing that the hardest often part of growth is the ongoing triggers, because they take you immediately to your limbic brain, to pain. And when we go to our limbic brain, we see the world again through the eyes of that 5-year-old. And it's quite distorted. And our reasoning is very much driven by what we're feeling, not by the facts. So it's emotional reasoning. And so we get quite distorted in our thinking. And that's where we can spiral downhill in a hurry if we don't have somebody to help us. And so what I would say with many people is, during the learning part of recovery, they form good connections. And then they get to a point where they go, okay, I've taken the course, I've learned, I'm ready to go off on my own. And they break the connections and they try to go solo. Then they get triggered and they start spiraling and they don't know how to stop the spiral. And for most of them, within 2 or 3 days, they start to lose their way because they don't know how to get out of this. And so you got to maintain the connections with at least one person who can help you during the triggers. And what people find is if every trigger, if you don't beat yourself up for it, but you see it as a chance to learn and grow some more, you do learn and grow. And then the triggers become less frequent, they become less intense because every trigger leads to greater healing, to greater tools. But those triggers are brutal because when your limbic brain is triggered, you go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond, and you're trying to stop going to old tools in a nanosecond. With cortisol pumping in your brain, which is turbocharging everything, how do you stop a moving train when it's leaving the station? Like, it's just, whoa, what do you do? And that becomes the most frustrating, difficult part for people, and I think in recovery.
How are you keeping these healthy connections without turning them into now back into an old pattern? You have this healthy connection, but slowly you start to integrate, and now it's the same thing you've recreated.
Exactly. And that's the danger with many people is they make connections, but they don't deal enough with their own shame stuff yet. And so pretty soon they're back to the old style of relationship in that connection. And so that's where, to me, you need connections with kind of other people on the journey who you're learning together, and there's going to be some healthier versus unhealthier relationships that develop. But you also need a mentor that is going to set healthy boundaries. And so what I tell clients all the time is, if I get to meet you, I've done this long enough that I can immediately feel the pull that you're placing on me, trying to pull me into a certain style of relating to you. And I can go, if I give into that pull, we're going to set up an unhealthy relationship. So I have to set boundaries right up front about what healthy looks like. But the other person is not going to like those boundaries because for them, that's scary. But I have to take the lead, and I need, so somebody working through their codependency, they need to find a healthy person who's going to maintain and enforce healthy boundaries while they adjust and heal and learn until those new boundaries become their default. And that's where so many people don't have that. And so they gradually slide back to their old defaults, and they've done a lot of good work, but they end up back where they started.
I know we've been talking a lot about this through the lens of, like, intimate relationships with your partner and things like that. But I know from my own experience that these codependent dynamics have played out in all of my relationships with friends, with parents, with our children. If you could speak about how that's the case, where it's these things aren't just with your primary partner, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I emphasize to people is that for most kids growing up in complex trauma, so they could become codependent by needing to survive. So life was dangerous, so they had to give up their needs, adapt, and all of the stuff we talked about. But they also could have been trained to be codependent by parents who, based on their culture, children should be seen, not heard. Children should always obey and just get over stuff, all of those kind of things, be happy all the time. And so they are actually being trained to be codependent by well-meaning parents. And those dynamics have been in the family for years and years, and it's part of the culture even. And so what begins to happen in recovery is your parents still want to relate to you the same way. that you have to phone me every day. You have to tell me everything all the time. You can't set boundaries with me because that would be disrespectful. You can't say no to me. That would be disrespectful. You can't challenge me and call me on my stuff. That would be, so there's all kinds of different things that are part of that kind of dynamics within the family that the child has just been trained in. It's like the water they swim in. They don't even know it's there till they try to change it. And all of a sudden the family's mad at them. You're being a rebel. You're not cooperating with the program. You're not conforming. So those kind of families, it's all about conformity. But what's really happening is you're asked to conform to what is unhealthy. And as soon as you try to make it healthy, you're now the bad guy. You're now the rebel. And they're going to use all kinds of tactics to pull you back into conforming. So they're going to lay guilt on you. They're going to threaten you. They're going to get angry at you. They're going to have your aunt call you and say, what are you doing to this family? Your mom can't sleep, blah, blah, blah. So there's all kinds of different things that they will do. And so what I want people to realize is that often breaking the codependency with your parents is harder than breaking it with your partner because it's been going on for years. But then what happens is that was your parenting template. You grew up that's how families operate. And so you just start reproducing it with your kids. That you should be seen and not heard. You should be happy all the time. Quit crying so much. If you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about. Blah. All those kind of things begin to happen. And all of a sudden we're training our children to be codependent. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Well, we didn't even know it. We were wanting the best for our kids. We just fall into the template we were raised with. And so to me, again, it's you have to be able to deconstruct the family dynamic stuff and realize there's probably 80% of that was really healthy, but there's some unhealthy stuff there that I'm going to need to look at and change so I don't pass it on to my kids. And so that's why we say complex trauma is the only type of trauma typically that becomes generational trauma. You just pass it on without even realizing it, thinking you're doing the best you can, given what you were taught and the tools you were given. And so you pass on all the stuff to your children.
Tim, I think we've done a really beautiful job. You've done a really beautiful job of helping us understand so many different things. And I know the people listening as well. But earlier on, you were talking about how, you're unlearning these things. And the challenging part is that you don't have healthy examples to draw from, especially if it is a generational thing where you grew up in this. I know that I did, and I can say I know Stephanie did as well. But maybe if you wouldn't mind, take a moment and just kind of paint the real idealistic picture of what a healthy interdependent relationship between two people would kind of look like.
Right.
Because I know that everybody, we're always kind of striving to work towards it. And I think sometimes we glimpse it. And then 2 hours later, like, oh, nope, we're still stuck in codependency, right? What does a real idealistic kind of view of what a relationship not necessarily should be, but can be?
Right. So a bunch of different ways to come at this, but start with this. So basically it's putting words to what does love look like. And so we all have these physical, emotional, relational, intellectual, spiritual needs. And so a relationship is, or a healthy life is, where those 12 needs are being met. What happens though is I can't meet all of my 12 needs on my own. There's some needs that I need others to help me meet. But 95% I can learn, and I need to learn how to meet them on my own and have a relationship with myself and all of that. But I do need relationships to help meet some of the needs. So I do need connection. I do need comfort, and I do need encouragement, and all of those things I need somebody else for. And so part of the challenge to me with all of this is a relationship is, I got to start with a relationship with myself before I can ever have a healthy relationship with anybody else. So I have to learn to take care of my needs, to be aware of my needs. I have to learn to be present to myself. All of that becomes the starting point. Then when I get into a relationship, there's going to be The basis is this: your needs matter just as much as mine, 50-50. So over time, there's going to be days I sacrifice, there's going to be days you sacrifice, but over time, it's going to work out to about 50-50 sacrifice, give and take. It's not going to be a lopsided thing where you get your way 90% of the time and I give in 90% of the time. It's going to be a 50-50 imbalance is what it. So that means I have to talk about my needs. That means I have to be vulnerable. That means I have to attach and truly connect with that authentic, vulnerable me. Well, that's never happened before in complex trauma. So you're learning a whole new set of connection. But then I have to learn to be present to you and attuned to your needs. And then when I see you having a bad day or you're struggling, then it's like, what's their part? What's my part? Do I run in and do it all for them? Or do I help a little bit, but they got to do most of it? And so we got to talk about that. We got to figure that out. So that's now communication. That's potential conflict. Oh, that's scary. That's not cut and dry. Is this 73% or 68%? I don't know. It's somewhere in the middle there. How do we figure that out? So there's a whole lot of learning about how to meet each other's needs and what's your part and what's my part. What are you responsible for? What am I responsible for? But the bottom line is your needs matter just as much as mine. And so we have to be all about learning to meet our own needs, but then where we help each other with our needs.
Tim, we can't thank you enough. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you. I know that you've got a ton of videos on your YouTube channel that talk about all of these topics and more. Your website, it's timfletcher.ca. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to throw out or mention before we wrap up?
No, that's it. Like I mentioned, we do have an online course that people can take, and we now have some self-study courses that people can take. Just because we realize this is a very complex journey that takes a lot of time and needs a lot of support. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that relationships, for me personally, I think it's part of I think it's what this whole thing is all about, meaning life. I think we're here to have these connections. I think we're here to connect with other people, to experience love, to have love, all of these kind of things. And it's kind of the hardest thing to do, right? I mean, it's incredibly challenging. And we've highlighted over the last hour and a half of exactly why that is the case. But thank you again, Tim. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We wrap every episode with a fun little tagline. It's expect the best and plan for the greatest.
Very good. Well,
so we'll see everybody on the next. Yeah, nice to meet you too as well, Tim. Thank you. And we'll see everybody next time.
Wait and see, you and me, we were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal insights and experiences, things that we have found to be helpful and healing on our journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.